Hey, Carol, Colorado, huh? Beautiful state, historic state, actually, although I don't know your town. And right now, it's only the two of us who are here. So we could have a grand old time, just you and me. Up now, the numbers are starting to come in here. North Carolina, Middletown, Connecticut. I'm doing something in North Carolina soon. Albuquerque, New Mexico. Robin, oh, good to see you. Pax is here, and Facebook people are here now too. So I will jump right in, looking for Danny, of course. And I'm not sure she knew I was coming live here. I just got off the road, so I didn't announce this ahead of time. But I'm going to try and do these, as I say, more and more frequently now that I'm not traveling anymore. Let's start right with trying to take stock of where we are about 4 months into the Donald J. Trump presidency. I'm going to look at 3 things to start with, trying to pull together the questions that you asked. And the first are the tariffs. The second is the Department of Government Efficiency. And the third is what the Republicans are calling officially the big, beautiful bill, one big, beautiful bill, which is, of course, a takeoff on what Trump has called it. So let's take a look at where we are with those 3 things. So first of all, the tariffs. Just to sort of wrap up what a tariff is a tool. A tariff is a kind of tax on goods coming into a country from another country. And Trump maintained during his campaign that he was going to create tariff walls around the United States that would enable people in the US to pay off the national debt and to pay off the real gap in the deficit between the money that comes in every year and the money that goes out every year. And we've been operating in the red since Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was the last to balance the budget. He argued that foreign countries pay tariffs, but that's wrong. It's always been wrong. And anytime anybody tried to tell him that, he was insulting about it. But the truth is that consumers pay tariffs, and the country that is inside the tariff wall pays the tariffs. That's just the way it happens. And right now, economists estimate that Trump's tariffs have so far cost the United States about $34 billion. And that number is going to go higher, of course, during the summer. So Trump's idea was he was going to create this tariff wall that was going to enable the U.S. to offload the cost of paying for its deficit and paying for its debt. And some people say, well, Biden used tariffs, and it's true. Like I say, tariffs are not inherently good or bad. They are a tool that can achieve the society that a country wants to achieve. And what the United States has focused on for, more than 40 years now has been the idea of trying to lower tariffs so that if things are made in other countries more efficiently than we can make them in the United States, and I'm going to throw out avocados here, for example, and sometimes electronics, things like that. You don't want to have high tariffs on those things because you want them to come into your country. But if you're trying to protect an industry in your country, like we try and protect the wine industry, you put a tariff on that so that it costs more for other countries' product to come into the country. So tariffs are just tools, and different presidents have used them in different ways, but we have not had a tariff wall around the country since the Great Depression. The idea that it's a good thing for the country to create this tariff wall really went out with the crisis of the Depression, when countries realized they needed to have trade with other countries in order to prop up the world economic system. So Trump tried to do this thing, but he had a real problem with the fact, first of all, that it didn't work, but second of all, that he didn't have the power to do it. So the Constitution gives the power to levy tariffs to Congress, and to Congress alone. So he took that power, and he took that power under something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And I had to look that over at my notes to tell you what that was, because it's usually abbreviated. And if you see these in letters, in articles right now, and you see IEEPA, and you're thinking, what on earth is IEEPA? That all that is a law that says that if there's an emergency, a real economic emergency of one sort or another, you don't have to call Congress back into session, and you don't have to let them argue about something. The president can adjust something really quickly if there is, in fact, an economic emergency. It's the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, just designed to give the president leeway if there's an emergency. So one of the ways that Trump has put in place a lot of legislation now that he doesn't really have the power to do is by declaring a ton of emergencies. And if you remember, there is a sort of a fail-safe in our system for declaring emergencies that Congress can come back into session or can be in session and say, we don't have an emergency. And if somebody says that in the House of Representatives, that issue has to be resolved in 10 days. And that's why Congress, the Republicans in Congress, have currently set the idea that for the benefit of, or as far as it concerns the economic emergency, that a day is not a day for the rest of the session, so that they will never get to 10 days. Something that I thought was really would get a lot more attention than it did. They've basically said Congress can't step in and stop Trump from using this emergency Economic Powers Act. So he's done this, but the IEEPA says that it really has to be an emergency, and that's really quite limited what you can do in it. But Trump just said we have an emergency both because there is fentanyl coming into the United States and because we're running a deficit. Although we've run a deficit, as I say, since the Clinton administration. That's an emergency, and therefore he has the power to create these sweeping new tariffs. Well, of course, as you know, there have been all these fights over tariffs, and one of the things that's happened is that Trump has threatened enormous powers and enormous tariffs, and then he's backed way off on them. And one of the things that people like me are watching is that there is this real drop in the market when he threatens a high tariff, and then he backs off and the market pops back up. And it's pretty clear some people are riding those dips and rises and making a lot of money off it. So one of the things that happened last week was that somebody involved in the financial industry said to the Financial Times that Wall Street is talking about taco trades. And that isn't the actual taco, but if you've seen images of tacos around today and you've heard people talking about tacos and you're thinking, what on earth is going on? That's a reference to the idea that Trump, T, always A, chickens, C, out, O, taco. And that argument that showed up in the Financial Times was that traders have recognized now they can buy cheap when the market tanks after Trump threatens a high tariff, because they can assume he's going to chicken out and it's going to come back up later. So they're talking about taco trading. That's what that whole thing is. Anyway, so while that happened yesterday, you also yesterday had a federal district court stopping the tariffs, saying they are illegal. Because not all the tariffs, by the way, but most of the tariffs, because you cannot use IEEPA to have these very broad tariffs. It is an emergency power only. So when that happened last night, all of a sudden the futures and so on in the stock market popped right up, because we were no longer trying to figure out what was happening with Trump and tariffs and this and that. And as you may or may not know, one of the things that we have seen is that the administration has been using the threat of tariffs for the Trump organization to do things like cut a deal to have real estate development with 3 golf courses in Vietnam. Vietnam's biggest trading partner is us, and they got hit with really high tariffs, so they panicked and cut this deal with the Trump organization pretty clearly over the tariffs, at least with the threat of the tariffs hanging over them. And similarly, we know that Musk's Starlink has been able to get into countries it was not previously able to get into, with the idea that the State Department said, we'll feel a lot better about you and how you want to work with the U.S. if Starlink can come in. So that tariffs have had that other effect as well. But last night, this federal district court said you can't do that. Now, they did that under the idea that the Emergency Powers Act is limited. But there was something really interesting in what they said. And, the thing about, so just so you know, all of these decisions are available online. They're a little hard to find. You usually go to a place called Court Listener, but they've got a lot of stuff there. But the way legal decisions are written out is there is at the beginning of them a very quick explanation of how the court's going to rule and what they're thinking, the way they're thinking about an issue. Then they go into a long thing about whether or not the different sides have standing or not, and whether the court that where it's being heard is the right court. Then they talk about the history of the case at great length, which is interesting for somebody like me who's interested in how the history develops, and it's a good refresher. And then they once again explain how and why they're ruling the way they are. So you can read these, but the places that you really want to focus are on that very first short piece, which is usually between 2/3 of a page and 3.5 pages, and the very end. And they've got titles, so you can find those if you're interested. But the reason I mention that is because what the district court said last night was specific and important. It said Congress cannot delegate to anybody else the powers that the Constitution gives to Congress. So while obviously the MAGA Republicans are more than happy to have Trump messing around with tariffs the way they are, the district court said that's unconstitutional. You can't do this. You cannot delegate your powers to someone else. And that's going to matter in a number of different ways that I hope I get to. So that's what happened last night. And all the markets were like, yay, we're done, even knowing that the Trump administration was going to challenge that, which really, frankly, they could have taken that loss and declared a win, say, well, we can't do it because of the courts, and walked away. But they chose not to do that. And today, an appeals court put a stay on that. So now the tariffs are back on, and all is utter confusion, which is really, really bad for our economic security, simply because you can't really invest or do anything unless you know how much your products are going to cost. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was those tariffs that you asked about. But the second thing, so that's where we are with that has looked like a real victory for Trump, but it's really not. It's not clear where that stands. Now, the second thing is the Department of Government Efficiency, which came in on January 20th. And Trump said at the time he was putting billionaire Elon Musk in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency. Then the administration tried to back away from that and say that Elon Musk was only an advisor. And just last week, I think it might have been this week, a district court said a lawsuit against Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency can go forward because it's pretty clear he should have been appointed. He should have gone through the official appointments process, and he did not. So today, the administration is trying to say, well, everybody's in charge of DOGE. So they're trying to get around this idea that they have they created this fake agency and put in charge of it somebody who didn't have the advice and consent of the Senate and was not an elected official. And that was pretty clearly unconstitutional. So they're trying to get around that now. But the Department of Government Efficiency has also been a failure in many ways and a weird success. And what I mean by that is that, of course, Elon Musk insisted he was going to save the government $2 billion. And then it was $1 billion. And then it was, the numbers kept dropping. And now we're at about 20 billion, except there are all these lawsuits over it. So it's not clear that, in fact, it's going to save any money at all. And in fact, the government is spending significantly more money under the Trump administration than it did under the Biden administration a year ago. And that's for a number of different reasons, but there haven't been any savings. So what they really have done is they haven't saved money, but they have traumatized the federal government. They have traumatized workers, and they have badly hurt the delivery of public services, badly hurt that. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. The place where the Department of Government Efficiency has succeeded beyond, I think many of the people within its wildest dreams is they have mined our data. They have taken Americans' data from the siloed positions where it was kept in the federal government, and they're creating a giant database. And that is hugely problematic, terrifying, and something that we're going to have to continue to monitor. Now, a number of courts have tried to step in and say, first of all, you can't fire all these people. And second of all, you cannot mine that data, get out of there. But, that horse pretty much seems to have left the barn. So one of the places I read a lot about this is at Wired and at 404 Media. We're seeing increasing signs of the use of a large database to find undocumented immigrants, for example, to monitor people's social media accounts, and possibly even to chase license plates across state lines. New article in Wired about that today. So that's still out there. Now, Elon Musk has left the administration in disgrace. He has basically fought with everybody, but he still has that information. So, and his people remain embedded in the U.S. government, and the Department of Government Efficiency is being taken over by the person who had been Musk's right-hand man, Russell Vought, which is Vought, and he is the director of the Office of Management and Budget. And he is intimately connected to Project 2025, and he's going to continue to try and make these cuts because, as I keep saying, their goal is to get rid of the government, to get rid of education, to get rid of business, and so on, because they think it has been corrupted by the concept of the modern government, that the government should provide a basic social safety net, should regulate business, should promote infrastructure, and should protect civil rights, and should protect international, international rules-based international order. All right, so that's what's happening with DOGE, and then you also have this big, beautiful bill, this omnibus bill that the Republicans are trying to force through under budget reconciliation. And the reason they're trying to do that is because under the concept of budget reconciliation, things cannot be filibustered. So they would be able to pass it through the Senate with just a simple majority. So what they've done, though, in the House is to throw everything in that bill. Everything in the kitchen sink is in that bill. Things that don't have anything to do with the budget. And that's okay in the House. It's not okay in the Senate, where the Senate parliamentarian is almost certainly going to say, this really doesn't fly. You need to strip those measures that don't have anything to do with money out of the bill. Now, the Senate could and probably will ignore the Senate parliamentarian, which is a very rare thing to do. But there is this big problem of this omnibus bill with a lot of crap in it that the Senate doesn't like. So right now, that measure is in the Senate, and the senators are already saying, we are not passing this way because we have a number of very vulnerable senators, including Tom Tillis in North Carolina, Susan Collins in Maine. There's about 8 or 9 senators who are really in trouble because of how unpopular MAGA Republicans are, and they don't want to pass that bill. So that too looks like it's stalled. Now, one of the things that you asked me about is there anything in that bill about elections? I do not believe there is. I believe that which has been circulating on social media is a misnomer. Trump has gone after elections in 2 ways. One, through an executive order, when he first took office, and the other this week with a lawsuit against the state of North Carolina. And he's definitely fighting against elections. I do not believe currently that is in this omnibus bill. What is in the omnibus bill is an attempt to make it extremely difficult to enforce contempt of court rulings, or even to get contempt of court rulings. And this is very clearly an attempt to protect Trump, for whom 3 courts right now are looking at him and his administration as being in contempt of court. So that's what they're doing with that particular bill. So in this 4 months into the Trump administration, which has looked like a juggernaut, remember shock and awe and all the stuff they were going to do, and they did. In fact, the courts and the American people are catching up and saying, you can't do this. We don't want this. This is not what we asked for. You need to stop this. So there is this moment where the brakes are being applied, but not strongly enough yet. So let me tell you a little bit more about this. So let me see where I'm going to. So some of the things that are continuing to happen, first of all, is that the Trump organization and Trump himself are making bank on the presidency, especially through cryptocurrency. This is the biggest heist in history. It's the biggest scandal in the American presidency, and I think they're not getting a lot of traction in terms of pushing back on it because most people don't understand cryptocurrency. And I explained it in a previous video. I don't have time to re-explain it now. But we need to be watching cryptocurrency and the ways in which Trump and his family are making money off it, and how they're making money through things like the tariff that I just talked about. There is also the extraordinary crisis of the attack on science and the attack on medicine. And that is a huge crisis. One of the things that came out this week is that although Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr., insisted he wouldn't mess with immunization schedules. In fact, they have. And one of the things that they have said is that they don't any longer recommend that pregnant women and small children get the COVID vaccine. And this was a surprise to the CDC and its pediatricians, and the College of obstetricians and gynecologists came out right away and said, please don't do that. Please get those vaccines, because in fact, COVID is still deadly for infants and for fetuses, infants, and fetuses and infants. You should read up on that. But one of the things that they're doing there, I've talked before about how Kennedy doesn't believe in germ theory. He believes germs exist, but if your body is healthy enough, it won't have a problem with germs. That's belied, of course, by our understanding of germ theory since the 1870s. I mean, we've been at this a while. And as I say, the proof is written in every graveyard, and the lack of the babies' gravestones once we get vaccines for things like measles. It's really dramatic to a historian. But remember, he is deeply tied to the wellness industry and the influencer industry. And the more that you delegitimize science and doctors, the more power that industry has and the more money that industry will make. So one of the things we saw coming out this week from the Department of Health and Human Services was a report that purported to make an argument. And of course, somebody checked the notes and it was citing studies that didn't exist. So that is still out there. But one of the other things that I think we're really starting to see is enormous frustration on the part of Trump, who is mentally deteriorating. That's obvious to anybody who's watching him, and the mainstream media is now finally talking about it. But he needs instant gratification, and that is part, I think, of why he loved the tariffs. Everybody paid attention to him when he suddenly said, we're going to have 135% tariffs. No, they're going to be 20. No, they're going to be, he can command attention, and he loves attention. But I think one of the reasons we're seeing all these pardons coming out now is because they're unilateral. You asked me if you can reverse a presidential pardon. No. In the Constitution, they are final. They are a get out of jail free card for a federal offense, not for a state offense. And they're immediate. So people beg for them. In at least one case, it appears they have handed over more than $1 million to Trump to get one. It's a huge problem that we are in a place where we have a president who feels like he is immune from everything and is willing essentially to sell pardons. That would be something that I think we have to deal with going forward because of the idea of a corrupt president. That being said, the Constitution provides that when you have a president like Trump, the Congress is supposed to step up to the plate and impeach him. This would not be a problem if the senators and Congress people were doing their job, which is basically what the court said when it said Congress can't delegate its responsibilities to any other branch of government. And what they meant by that was the tariffs, but that also applies to the Department of Government Efficiency, which again was never real and was impounding the appropriations Congress had made illegally under both the Constitution and under the Impoundment Act of 1974. Once Congress has provided the money, the executive branch has to spend it, and DOGE simply was not doing that. So I think Trump has found himself extremely frustrated and is doing these pardons. They're a problem, but they wouldn't be a problem if Congress was, in fact, sticking up for its own power. And one of the reasons that it is not doing that is because the MAGA Republicans, and I think the Republican Party in general now, has lost faith in democracy. They no longer trust the idea of people voting. This is why they're trying to get people away from voting. And they are focusing on what they call the unitary executive. And the Supreme Court is definitely doing this, where they're trying to curtail the power of Congress in order to give that power to a president, because once you get your president in office through things like Citizens United, he then can act as a very small group of Americans want him to. And we know about 4% of Americans like Project 2025, even fewer like some of the other things going into power. So I think what we're seeing now is this frustration on the part of Trump, but we are also seeing the surprise on the part of the MAGA Republicans who kept insisting that the government didn't work and that it would be easy and they could step in and they could get stuff done. And what they're discovering is they don't know how to write budgets. Dan Bongino was on TV, I think it was this morning, complaining about how much work it is to work at the FBI because he's used to being, a MAGA influencer on his own schedule. This actually involves a lot of work. And you're also seeing what James Madison identified way back, even before the Constitution, and that is fights within MAGA over religious doctrine. So today we got the report that Rick Grinnell in the administration has fired Floyd Brown, who was the vice president who was installed at the Kennedy Center, because Floyd Brown is a Christian who is dead set against gay marriage and homosexuality, and Rick Grinnell is a gay man married to his husband. Now they're both, or were in the administration, but they're already starting to fight, which is exactly what Madison identified as a key reason not to have church involved in state. Everybody who keeps saying, oh, we want to make it a Christian nation, this next question should always be, who's Christianity? Because all of these flavors of religion are different in sometimes ways that look really small to people outside them, but they're huge for the people inside them. So we're starting to see the flagging, I think, meaning the slowing down of this administration. Now, that being said, I kept talking about Trump's frustration. One of the things that really jumped out to me last night was when he posted on Truth Social a meme of him looking sort of like a film noir character walking on a dark city street that looked wet at night. And he had Pepe the Frog behind him. Pepe the Frog is a universal symbol now of the alt-right, of the sort of violent militias. And in his statement around the picture, it said that he was on a mission from God. And it said, it used a quote directly from the QAnon conspiracy that said that means that the deep state, members of what they call the deep state, are going to be arrested. And this reminded me very, very much of what he kept doing with the alt-right after the Unite the Right rally at Charlottesville, Virginia in August of 2017. And then what he did in September 2020 when he told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. I think he's sending a message to all of us that if he doesn't get his way, he's going to call the kinds of people that he pardoned or commuted the sentence of yesterday, gang leaders and so on, to wreak havoc on American society. So I'm going to end here with a question that all of you asked. I said last Tuesday, I guess, that I thought the summer was going to be ugly and to be prepared for that. And I frightened a lot of people. And what I meant by that was that the higher costs of tariffs are going to kick in this summer. So are the cuts that the Department of Government Efficiency has made to a number of social services. And those are going to ripple throughout our society. Prices are going to go up and people are going to find it harder to find the services that they've had in the past, and they're going to be angry. Trump is going to get tripped up again and again. And I'm sorry, let me just add here quickly. You asked where we are with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. That is still being argued in the courts, and the administration is simply not really trying to cooperate at all. And that too is going to come to a head because Trump has always been able to string things along for a really long time by playing procedural games with the courts. And the federal courts are not putting up with that this time. They're going slower than some people would like. But they are saying, as Judge Paulazzini's said this week, no, I'm not going to extend this anymore. We had a plan and you never challenged it. Put up or shut up. And what they came up with was a really hastily written piece that basically made an argument that they made last March that was dismissed. So over the course of the summer, we're going to see more and more of this friction. And I think we're going to see more and more of Trump's frustration with the fact that people are making fun of him for being a taco trader and for saying he's mentally incompetent, and the different ways in which there's pushback against him. So I am expecting tempers are going to be high this summer, and that the administration is going to be as threatening as it possibly can be. And yet The reason that they're frustrated and the reason they're in this place is because the American people are pushing back. And now is not the time to say, okay, well, the tariffs might be going away. Now we can, I don't know, play tic-tac-toe. Now is the time to keep that pressure on, because they will fight harder and harder to establish the destruction of the US courts, for example, and our US justice system. There's going to be more of an attempt to round up undocumented migrants who are here in the country, and they are going to sweep in American citizens the way they have, simply because of the numbers. They're currently arresting about 635 thereabouts people a day. Stephen Miller is insisting it should go up to 3,000 a day. Well, you can't do that without deeper and deeper sweeps and more mistakes. So over the course of the summer, I think we're going to see things get more unsettled, angrier, and now is the time to keep up pressure in that way. Now, one of the things that people ask me to do is to say what you should do in this moment. And I keep talking about this, right? The obvious things: be involved at government at all levels, make your principles known. You don't have to agree with people, but you do have to say that you care about the Constitution and you care about democracy, and that you don't want to be part of a system in which that's breaking. And that is not partisan, by the way. That is a Republican. True Republicans and independents, as well as Democrats, should be operating together. And as I say, we don't know where any of this is going to come out. But and to make sure we are flooding the zone with information, facts, with fact-based information. And then finally, people asked what to do if you're in a democratic state, because you feel like your time is wasted. Remember, there are across the country huge numbers of national organizations that are active in Republican-dominated or voter suppression states. And there are, it occurs to me I should show where some of these are. There are conglomerates of them. That's the wrong word. There are groups of them where you can learn about each and decide where your efforts would be best spent, because there are all kinds of different ways to do things. So just remember, the fact that you're in Massachusetts, for example, doesn't mean you can't be involved in other states where national organizations are involved, or of course you can be involved with state organizations as well. And there are a number of wonderful ones. I work in a number of different states because those are the places where gerrymandering, for example, is being taken head on. So look for national organizations that operate in those states. And also you can look for state organizations. And I will try to remember to post some of those. All right, I'm at my limit here, and I'm going to let you go. We're launching some really cool stuff over the next week, I hope, but certainly over the next couple of weeks. And I hope you enjoy it. And we'll see what the summer brings. But it's cool to be ramping up the retaking of our democracy. And it's I read somebody saying once today, actually. Isn't it cool that we are the ones getting to write the story of the reawakening of American democracy? And that, of course, has been my project all along. And that's a cool task to get to do. So let's get out there and do it. And you'll hear from me again on paper over the next couple of days, and certainly again live next week. Thank you for being here.